At 6,300 meters, where the air is too thin to fly and landing is impossible, a Pakistani Army helicopter defied physics for exactly 90 seconds to pull one climber off Nanga Parbat's Rupal face. The mountain rescue that saved Tomaz Humar made international headlines. 4 years later, his final radio transmission went silent. The arithmetic of survival begins with a collapsed weather window. Tomaz Humar had planned a 5-day weather window for his solo ascent of Nanga Parbat's Rupal face. The forecast showed stable conditions, light winds, and clear skies. What was supposed to last 5 days collapsed in 18 hours. By the time the storm hit, Humar found himself caught during a technical traverse on the Rupal face, the largest mountain wall on Earth. Retreat was impossible. The route below had become a death trap of avalanche-prone slopes and ice-glazed rock. At 6,300 meters, the air holds barely half the oxygen found at sea level. Every breath becomes a conscious effort. Every movement burns through precious energy reserves. Day 1 meant digging. In deteriorating conditions with visibility dropping to mere meters, Humar carved out a snow cave in the face of the mountain. The arithmetic was brutal. At that altitude, his body would consume oxygen at nearly double the rate it would at sea level, even at rest. Each swing of his ice axe, each scoop of snow removed from his shelter, drained calories he couldn't replace. Humar was alone, but his satellite phone kept him tied to a world that was already calculating his obituary. His satellite phone became his lifeline to the world below. Base camp recorded his calm, measured voice reporting the situation. 3 days of food, 2 days of fuel for his stove, maximum. The fuel wasn't just for warmth. Without it, he couldn't melt snow for water. Below, at base camp, the world's best high-altitude experts were running the numbers. And the numbers didn't lie. Humar was already dead. The Pakistani Army received the initial distress call on day 2. Their assessment was immediate and stark. Rescue operations above 6,000 meters were considered impossible. The service ceiling for their helicopters was theoretical at best in the thin air above Nanga Parbat. No pilot had ever attempted a rescue at that altitude on the Rupal face. International media attention built as weather reports painted a grim picture. No clearing expected for 5 to 7 days. Meteorologists tracking the storm system showed a massive low-pressure front moving across the Karakoram. Wind speeds at Humar's elevation were estimated between 80 and 120 kilometers per hour. Sustained winds that strong could tear apart a snow cave or launch a climber off the face entirely. Yet Humar's voice on the recorded satellite calls remained eerily calm. He reported his condition methodically, core body temperature stable, early signs of frostbite on his fingertips, no signs of altitude sickness or swelling in his brain. His breathing was hard but controlled. His speech was clear, not confused from lack of oxygen. By day 3, the calculations turned desperate. His base camp team worked with high-altitude physiology experts to model his survival odds. At 6,300 meters, the human body begins consuming its own muscle tissue for energy within 48 hours. Humar had been rationing his food since day 1, but the math was unforgiving. Even with perfect calorie management, his reserves would be exhausted by day 6. The fuel situation was worse. Without his stove, he couldn't melt snow. The human body requires a minimum of 2 liters of water per day at altitude just to maintain basic functions. More in the cold, dry air of the death zone. Dehydration would set in by day 4, severe dehydration by day 5. Weather monitoring stations across Pakistan and northern India tracked the storm. Satellite imagery showed the system intensifying rather than dissipating. Ground teams at Nanga Parbat base camp measured wind speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour at their elevation of 4,200 meters. If the winds were that strong at base camp, conditions at Humar's position were likely twice as severe. International climbing community members began preparing for the worst. Humar was known for his bold solo ascents, but Nanga Parbat's Rupal face had already claimed dozens of lives. The mountain's reputation was built on storms that appeared without warning and weather systems that could trap climbers for weeks. By the end of day 3, the rescue had shifted from urgent to theoretical. Weather forecasts showed no improvement for another 4 days minimum. Day 4 brought an unexpected development. 2 Pakistani Army pilots stepped forward to volunteer for what military officials were calling an experimental high-altitude rescue attempt. Colonel Rashid and Major Khalik had logged more flight hours in the Karakoram than any other pilots in the service. Their aircraft of choice was a French-built Llama helicopter, specifically designed for high-altitude operations. The Llama's specifications read like a textbook study in marginal performance. Maximum service ceiling, 7,500 meters in perfect conditions. But perfect conditions didn't exist on Nanga Parbat. The helicopter's turbine engine would lose power exponentially as air density decreased. At 6,300 meters, the aircraft would be operating at the absolute edge of its performance envelope. Weight calculations became critical. Every kilogram mattered. The pilots stripped the helicopter of all non-essential equipment, emergency medical gear, extra fuel tanks. Even the co-pilot's seat were removed. The arithmetic was harsh but simple. For every kilogram of weight removed, they gained precious meters of altitude capability. This was a mission operating entirely in the red. Llama maximum ceiling, 7,500 meters. Humar's position, 6,300 meters. Margin for error, 0. The first rescue attempt launched at 6:30 a.m. on day 4. Weather conditions had improved marginally. Winds at base camp had dropped to 60 kilometers per hour, still well above safe flying conditions at sea level. But in the death zone, marginal improvements could mean the difference between possible and impossible. Colonel Rashid pushed the Llama to 5,800 meters before rotor efficiency dropped below safe operating parameters. The helicopter's blades were spinning in air so thin that lift generation became inconsistent. Control inputs lagged. The aircraft began to shudder as it approached its absolute ceiling. At 5,800 meters, still 500 meters below Humar's position, the pilots made the decision to abort. Humar's voice on the satellite phone that evening revealed the toll the ordeal was taking. His words came slower, longer pauses between sentences. He reported that feeling had disappeared from 3 fingers on his left hand. Early-stage frostbite was setting in despite his efforts to maintain circulation. Day 5 brought a brief weather improvement. Satellite imagery showed a temporary gap in the storm system. Wind speeds at altitude dropped to an estimated 40 kilometers per hour. The pilots saw their window and took it. The second rescue attempt reached 6,100 meters, just 200 meters below Humar's snow cave. From the cockpit, Colonel Rashid could see the dark opening in the snow where the Slovenian climber had carved his shelter. But downdrafts created by the mountain's massive face caught the helicopter. Sudden vertical air currents that could drop an aircraft 200 meters in seconds. Major Khalik fought the controls as the Llama was pushed toward the rock wall. The rotor wash from their own blades, reflecting off the mountain face, created additional turbulence. In air this thin, recovery from an upset condition was nearly impossible. The pilots had no choice but to retreat once again. Ground teams at base camp began preparing for a body recovery mission rather than a rescue. The mood was not defeat, it was finality. Fuel calculations showed that the helicopter was already operating at its absolute range limits. Each rescue attempt consumed fuel that couldn't be replaced at altitude. The math was becoming impossible. Humar's satellite phone calls grew weaker. His beast carried the unmistakable signs of severe dehydration. Speech slightly slurred, thoughts taking longer to form into words. Medical advisors at base camp recognized the symptoms. His body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature and brain function. International media coverage intensified. Climbing websites provided live updates every few hours. Satellite phone transcripts were published within hours of each call. The mountaineering community watched as one of the world's most accomplished solo climbers fought for survival in real time. Weather forecasts remained grim. The storm system showed no signs of dissipating. If anything, meteorologists predicted the weather would worsen before it improved. Ground blizzard conditions were expected to reach base camp within 48 hours. By day 6, the Pakistani Army had officially classified the mission as a recovery operation rather than a rescue. The helicopter's fuel reserves were insufficient for another high-altitude attempt. The pilots had pushed their aircraft beyond all tested parameters twice. Yet Colonel Rashid and Major Khalik refused to abandon the mission entirely. They requested permission for one final attempt. Weather conditions on the morning of day 7 showed marginal improvement. Winds had shifted direction, potentially reducing the downdrafts that had forced their previous retreat. The decision came down to mathematics and margins that no longer existed. The Llama helicopter lifts off from Nanga Parbat base camp for what everyone knows will be the final attempt. Colonel Rashid has calculated fuel reserves down to the last kilogram. One landing attempt, one chance. If this fails, there won't be enough fuel for another try. The aircraft climbs through increasingly thin air. At 4,500 meters, engine performance begins to degrade noticeably. The turbine struggles to compress air that's already 40% less dense than at sea level. Every meter of altitude gain comes at an exponential cost in power and fuel consumption. The helicopter reaches its maximum theoretical service ceiling. Through the cockpit windscreen, the pilots spot a dark speck against the white expanse of the Rupal face. Humar's snow cave. The target is visible, but landing remains impossible. The ledge where he's trapped is barely wide enough for a single person, let alone a helicopter touchdown. This is where the rescue shifts from theoretical to desperate. A hover rescue at 6,300 meters pushes every system beyond design limits. The rotor blades are spinning in air so thin that lift generation becomes unpredictable. Control inputs lag by several seconds. The aircraft responds like it's flying through thick syrup. Major Khalik maintains position while Colonel Rashid assesses the approach. Wind currents created by the massive mountain face generate turbulence that could slam the helicopter into the rock wall without warning. Rotor wash reflecting off the snow creates additional instability. In air, this thin, recovery from an upset condition is nearly impossible. The critical moment arrives. Humar emerges from his snow cave, moving with the deliberate slowness of severe hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. 6 days at 6,300 meters have taken their toll. His movements are mechanical, precise, but labored. He clips into the rescue line that dangles from the helicopter's cargo hook. The physics working against them are brutal. The helicopter's engines are operating at maximum continuous power just to maintain altitude. The equation pushes the aircraft beyond its certified performance envelope. The pilots have perhaps 90 seconds before engine temperatures exceed safe operating limits. Rotor wash from the helicopter's blades threatens to destabilize the aircraft as the thin air provides minimal damping effect. Each gust of wind, each shift in air density, translates directly to the airframe. The llama shudders and bucks like an animal fighting for its life. The thin air offers no cushion, making every gust a punch to the airframe. Humar clears the ledge. Colonel Rashid immediately begins descent, trading altitude for airspeed and engine cooling. The helicopter drops at nearly 500 meters per minute, pushing the limits of safe descent rates. But staying at altitude means certain engine failure. The turbine temperatures are already redlining. The extraction window had lasted exactly 90 seconds. Any longer, and the helicopter's engines would have overheated beyond recovery. Any shorter, and Humar wouldn't have had time to secure himself to the rescue line. The margin between success and catastrophe measured in heartbeats. During the descent, medical assessment begins immediately. Humar is conscious but hypothermic. Core body temperature estimated at 32 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees below normal. Severe frostbite affects 3 fingers on his left hand and 2 toes on his right foot. But no life-threatening injuries, no signs of cerebral or pulmonary edema. The helicopter touches down at base camp with fuel reserves at absolute minimum. Ground crews immediately rush Humar to the medical tent while the aircraft is refueled and inspected. Engine analysis showed the turbine temperatures were 15 degrees Celsius hotter than the manufacturer said was safe. The helicopter had been operating beyond safe limits for the entire rescue sequence. Post-mission analysis declared the operation a textbook example of high-altitude helicopter rescue at theoretical limits. The Pakistani Army pilots had pushed their aircraft and their skills to the absolute edge of possibility. Weather conditions, fuel calculations, aircraft performance, and human endurance had aligned for exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds that separated rescue from recovery. The international climbing community hailed the rescue as impossible made real. Humar's survival became a case study in high-altitude physiology and helicopter operations. The mission proved that rescue was possible at altitudes previously considered beyond reach, but only under perfect conditions with perfect execution. Also established the hard limits of what was possible: the weather window, the aircraft performance margins, the fuel calculations, the pilot skills required. Everything had to align perfectly. Remove any single element, and the mission shifts from rescue to body recovery. The world celebrated the miracle. But for Tomaz Humar, the mountain was never finished with him. 4 years later, he went back. November 2009. Tomaz Humar sets his sights on Langtang Lirung, a 7,227-meter peak in Nepal's Himalayas. Unlike Nanga Parbat, this mountain offers no margin for error, no helicopter access within 2,000 meters of the summit, no satellite phone coverage on the technical sections. And crucially, the satellite phone lifeline that saved him 4 years ago was gone. No international media attention to pressure. Rescue authorities faced impossible attempts. The last confirmed communication comes on November 8th from Advanced Base Camp. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Unlike his Nanga Parbat expedition, Humar carries no satellite phone during the ascent phase. This decision reflects his philosophy of pure solo climbing, but it eliminates the communication lifeline that had saved his life 4 years earlier. Search helicopters locate his body on November 15th, 7 days after his final radio transmission. The discovery comes on a technical rock section at 5,900 meters, well below the summit. Body position and weather pattern analysis suggest the fall occurred days earlier, possibly within hours of his last communication. No communication equipment is found near the body. Speculation centers on equipment failure or separation during the fall, but the remote location and technical terrain make detailed investigation impossible. The helicopter crew can only confirm the location and condition before retreating due to altitude and weather limitations. Recovery proves impossible. The technical rock face where Humar fell offers no landing zones for helicopters. Ground-based recovery would require a full expedition with technical climbing support, weather windows, and logistics that exceed the capabilities of local rescue services. Langtang Lirung becomes his final resting place. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for future videos.